Welcome, I'm Marie and I'm a communication officer and a CSPC volunteer. And it's my pleasure to be today with Dr. Melanie Ratnam, CEO of the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here.
So let's talk first about the landscape a little bit.
Okay.
SWIST was founded in 1991 and there's been a lot of changes in the science policy landscape. What have been the most important advances for gender equity, and where do the critical gaps remain still?
I think, founded in 1981. A lot has changed, I think, in more than 4 decades. I think what might be helpful to do is segment it in sort of 2 ways. One is just understanding, what the policy landscape has been like for just women and from a gender sort of equality or equity lens overall. And then one is to also understand what that landscape means specifically within the STEM ecosystem. Mm-hmm. I would say that in general, the country has seen improvements with certain key policy levers when it comes to wage, right? So pay, and so that's one. I would say another one that over 4 decades has seen improvements is parental leave. These are sort of critical and broad policies that have seen improvements over that, close to almost half a century. Yeah. Right, when you think about it, in Canada, sort of across the board. So those are some examples. I would say probably in the last decade, there's been sort of more intentionality when it comes to workplaces, and there is a deeper understanding, I would say, not just here in Canada, but across North America, of equity-based policies. Mm-hmm. And I think that you've seen sort of a steep increase in that after George Floyd was murdered, and you've seen a lot of sort of EDI initiatives or policy implementations everywhere, but particularly in the workplace as well too. So those are some, I would say, key areas. I would also say that 2 other areas of policy where we've seen improvements is particularly over half a century is in the education space. And then we've also seen it with respect to safety. So I refer to the spectrum of gender-based violence. And so you've seen over half a century improvements when it comes to GBV and that entire spectrum. I am now going to delve a little bit deeper in terms of the STEM ecosystem, but also maybe just do a very quick or high-level deconstruction of those sort of key policy areas across Canada. And that's where I think that, while we've seen improvements in these areas, over 4 decades, when we look at evolving realities, whether that's economics of the country or the economy, whether that is innovation, all of these different things. You've also seen over half a century several advancements when it comes to that, right? And I think that if you deconstruct or in parallel look at those advancements and where we could be and what those key policy levers, if there are improvements tangentially with, STEM innovation and, the sort of desirable outcomes in terms of what that means for Canada's economy, I would say that progress has been slow, right? So if you take a sort of microscopic view of those sort of moving dynamics, and you also then look at, this is a great way to do it, is what are our neighbors doing, right? What are other countries doing? I think we almost don't want to look at progress necessarily over half a century. We should probably look at where we sort of fare with neighboring sort of countries, or countries that also have innovation and their growing economies, which ultimately is all about the improvement of your population, right? Your people. And here we are 40 million plus strong across this beautiful, beautiful land. And so the challenge, or I would say the opportunity to us, is how well are we going to do everything that we need to do to ensure that the Canadian population is strong. We have 5,000 plus municipalities and counties and jurisdictions and regions across Canada. And when you think of, our 13 provinces and territories, when you think of all of our municipalities, when you think of our entire Canadian population, when you think of the diversity in terms of the geography, the strengths and talents of the people, the land, the resources, and all of the ways in which these things intersect, there are sort of clear and obvious ways in which we can be really, really, really strategic to unlock the potential of our people, right? And so that, I think, is where, when you take a microscopic lens to some of those key policy levers, and you look at STEM, and you look at a STEM or STEM, when you look at this particular sector, the future, the next 5 to 10 years, we are ushering in the 4th and 5th industrial revolutions. And with this comes great opportunity, but it also comes great responsibility, and I think that countries that are incredibly strategic and incredibly intentional about understanding their people and unlocking that potential are the ones that are going to really, really optimize, their bottom line, which is the quality of life of their people, but also the economic return that comes from that. And so that's why that's sort of a long-winded way of coming back to your original question, which is, have we seen improvements? Yes. I would say, though, that if you take a microscopic sort of, how do you say? You do a sort of deep dive or take a microscope to what's going on with these key policy levers. I think that more can be done. And I think we can be much more strategic. So I'm going to pick one of those policy levers. Let's take pay equity, for example. On the surface, that might seem like a concept that is pretty straightforward to understand. And yet, when it comes to sort of pay equity legislation, we have pay equity legislation at the federal level, and we have that legislation at the provincial and territorial level as well. What does that mean, though? Pay equity at the federal level, that legislation only applies to federally regulated spaces, right? So telecom, transportation. But a majority of your small to medium-sized enterprises and in STEM, right? Whether that's advanced manufacturing companies, whether that's your tech companies, whether that's your health companies, all of these things, they sort of fall in that other category, which are largely like sort of SMEs. Mm-hmm. And so then provincial and territorial legislation is what applies. And so what this means is that you'll see a picture where, the realities of women and gender diverse people in STEM across Canada are not the same if you just take that key policy lever. It means that if we as an organization are advocating for pay equity, what we need to do is different for our constituents in BC than it is in Atlantic Canada, right? And I will say that, this might be surprising to some folks, but when you move from East Coast to West Coast, the pay equity or the wage gaps actually get larger from East Coast to West Coast, right? And then if you take that microscope and you sort of deconstruct even what's happened in the last 2 years, BC had an opportunity to implement new legislation, and they chose to not implement pay equity legislation, but pay transparency legislation, November 1st, 2023. And so here we are 2 years later, in 2025. And the key question is, did that legislation really improve those numbers? And folks will tell you that they haven't seen an improvement there. So stand back a little bit or zoom out a little bit, and if you look at just the sort of effectiveness of pay transparency legislation in other scenarios around the world where it has been implemented via policy, there was already sort of a lot of evidence that we could have learned from to see that it maybe wasn't the most effective way to do things. And in fact, here in Ontario, there's sort of a gold standard for, pay equity legislation. And so there are important and key lessons to learn when we deconstruct policy at that level. I think that not since the Great World War or World War II have we had an opportunity to actually improve sort of economic outcomes via STEM. And so I feel that STEM or STEM is a great conduit in the next 5-10 years for us to be intentional about the policies that we are going to shape, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years. And if we're really, really strategic about it, and those key sort of 5 policy levers, as it intersects with the STEM ecosystem and the realities of the people across Canada, the opportunity is ours for us to sort of really sort of optimize in terms of the outcomes of people.
And you made a great point about making Canada strong and about all the economical aspects, because usually when we talk about gender equity, people think, oh, it's a moral thing, it's an ethical thing, it's like the good or bad. And how, especially when we're talking to policymakers or to the general public, how can we make them understand that really encouraging the full participation of women in STEM is truly an asset to Canada's competitiveness, to the innovation ecosystem, to the research landscape?
Yeah, because I think it's, when you look at close to half the population being women and gender diverse people, unlocking that much talent is going to lead to economic returns that are profound. And you just have to look around the world at different scenarios or countries in which that talent has been unlocked and what that's meant for the country. So here in Canada, the opportunity is the same. I think that the gaps present a challenge, but especially in these next 5 to 10 years, if we are really, really strategic and intentional, there's an opportunity to accelerate the closing of those gaps via STEM or STEM. And I think, to your point, some people might view this as a nice to have, but if the economy of the country is an indication, right, as to all of a strong economy obviously means a lot of different things for people. It means health, a healthy population. It means that everyone has access to basic human rights. What that means for your country's productivity and your innovation, and sort of the cyclical outcomes that come from that are quite obvious. So I think that when you tap into half your country's population in a way that is brilliant and genius, I think you're going to yield economic returns that are not, in my opinion, not particularly nice to have, but they're a must-have. They're a need to have.
Absolutely. And so it leads to my next question. So how do we measure impact? Like, how do we have solid enough data collection and evaluation frameworks to really measure impact, or is it something that we need to improve? And how you mentioned looking at other countries, for example.
Yeah, I think this one is a particularly difficult question. And what I love about CSPC is that there are so many different panels that take place annually that unpack the data and the metrics and the measurement conversation. I'm going to deviate a little bit and maybe talk about something that's not as obvious, but there are scholars here that have been speaking about it here, like in 2025 as well, which is Canada has an opportunity to really reflect on what your sort of metrics are that we collect. And I think when we look at all of our different equity-seeking groups across Canada, we have to have an intentional conversation about what our sort of metrics of success are, and be intentional about maybe sort of reframing those metrics of success in a way that allows your populations all across Canada to thrive. It requires seeing beyond sometimes what our traditional view of numbers and metrics of success are. And that's the conversation that I think was particularly inspiring about CSPC 2025, because those very nuanced conversations about reframing the types of numbers. It was never a question about whether we can collect data. We know how to collect data. We know how to conduct research. That is a strong pillar across Canada. I think the challenge for us is going to be, can we sort of reframe what those metrics of success look like, what data collection looks like, and rethink about the traditional ways in which we do that, and maybe juxtapose that or design that from the lens of people and communities.
Since you mentioned CSPC and this year's conference, something we like to know is what is your opinion about the Canadian Science Policy Centre and its place as a knowledge mobilizer, talent incubator, connector in this science and policy community?
I think CSPC is one of a kind. I think it is, I remember the first time I came to a CSPC conference, and I remember how much I had learned in such a short time frame. So it is a convening, a very unique convening across Canada, where the stakeholders that are sort of key decision makers when it comes to STEM or science policy gather at the CSPC and then continue to connect over the course of the year. And the conversations that flow from the Canadian Science Policy Conference and the Centre itself are really, really nuanced and important year over year over year over year. So when you come to a CSPC gathering, you get a snapshot of what sort of the most pressing issues are in this moment in time, and you can't really emphasize the importance of a convening like that. I know that there are folks that come from other countries to the CSPC convening just because they say, our country doesn't have this, and this is incredible, and we need to sort of model this in other spaces and nations. And so I've always really, really valued the convening in a way that I think is going to be so important to the fabric of everything that we do. I think as the years go by, and you know, people continue to strengthen the foundation of what this, you know, what has been built here, I think you're going to see also this particular space be an opportunity or a lever for change in the science and STEM policy landscape, which I think is an incredibly powerful and exciting reality sort of for the future.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me.